Hello, everyone. My name is Elisa Ewan, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Teachers College. Thank you for joining us today for our first Alumni Career Development webinar of 2021, which is co-sponsored by TC Next and Alumni Relations. It covers a range of career-related topics and features speakers from a variety of industries. This is one of the many ways you can stay engaged to your TC family. I'd like to quickly remind you of a few more ways you can maintain a meaningful connection with Teachers College. 1. Hire TC alums and students. 2. Refer prospective students back to the college. 3. Show your pride by including Teachers College in all of your professional credentials. 4. Share your talents and expertise by volunteering to speak at TC events or by joining one of our 4 Alumni Association committees. And 5. When the time is right for you, support TC financially by donating to the TC Fund. We are especially grateful for TC alumni who share their knowledge through insightful presentations like the one we're about to hear today, for all of our TC community to learn together. And now, I would like to introduce you to today's event presenter, alumna Reva McPollom, who will be presenting Building Connections Through Culturally Responsive Practices. Reva is a digital learning expert and culturally responsive educator with over a decade of experience as a learning and development leader and edtech entrepreneur. On a mission to promote health and lifelong learning, she created Lesson B to transform health education in the United States through digital technologies. Reva has a master's degree in instructional technology and media from Teachers College, Columbia University, and lives with her wife and 3-year-old daughter in Mount Vernon, New York. Reva will be taking questions from the audience during the latter part of our event, so feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A pane below. We will be utilizing the chat and polling during today's workshop, which they are both located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical or audio issues, please feel free to chat me and let me know how I can help. And without further ado, please help me welcome Reva.
Thank you, Alyssa. Excited to be with everyone. Again, my name is Reva McPollom, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lesson B. We're a Mount Vernon, New York-based educational technology company, and we're reinventing the health education experience. And I'm also a graduate of Teachers College. And today I'm here to speak with you all about building connections through culturally responsive practices. So before we jump in, I want to share a little bit more about myself. So as Alyssa says, I have 17 years of experience working across digital media, digital marketing, and digital learning. And I pivoted to ed tech about 10 years ago, ultimately earning a master's degree in instructional technology and media and working as a learning and development leader, digital learning consultant. I've worked across K-12, higher ed, and workplace learning. I worked in corporate and academic environments, creative and technology, new and old media. And I've learned a thing or two about work, about culture, health, learning, and how all those things intersect. And since 2016, I've been on a mission to help ensure that every student feels confident, connected, and worthy of health and success through Lesson B by creating culturally responsive digital health curriculum for kids and teens. I'm also a wife, a mother, an artist, and everything I do is about design, truly. And being a designer to me is about creating things with intention, not just for self-expression or for self-fulfillment. And my intention is quite simple. I want to create a better world for my daughter to live in. And I've decided that transforming our values around health and connection through culturally responsive practices is the way in which I want to do that. And I hope that by the end of this talk, you too will recognize why that work is so important. So now I've told you a little bit about myself and why I care about culturally responsive practices. In the chat, I'd like to invite you to tell me a little bit more about yourselves so that we all know who's with us today. And this is also just a chance for us to learn a bit more about each other. So if you're a student, share what you're studying and what you're most passionate about learning right now. If you're working full time, share a little bit about what you do and why you're interested in today's topic. Everyone, share what you know already about culturally responsive practices. And we're just going to take a few seconds to let some responses come in. Oh, hi, Deborah. Yes, I do remember meeting at Amani Public Charter School. It's wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. So anything about what you're studying, what you're excited about learning, why you're interested in this topic, what you already know about culturally responsive practices. Mm-hmm. Yep. See, Lisa is working on understanding and combating bias in higher ed. Super important. Thank you, Lisa. Partnerships. Okay, thank you. Working in communications for TC. Okay. Workplace culture. Very important. All right. And some folks working with NYC DOE and want to implement more culturally responsive practices. All right. Thank you all for sharing. Now, before we get into this, I actually just want to take a moment for us to center ourselves, relax, and connect. Grounded meditation practices originated in collectivist cultures. Just taking a moment to set intention and be present can have tremendously positive benefits. So I want to invite you to take a moment with me right now. Flip your phones over, plant your feet on the floor, sit up tall, close your eyes. I'm actually going to turn off my camera for this moment with you. Now just try to get a sense of where you're at. Don't judge where you should be. And now we're going to take some breaths in and out, in and out. Focus on the air filling your lungs and exiting through your nose. Now take a longer breath for 4 seconds. 2, 3, 4. Hold for 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now slowly release for 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now just take a moment. Whew. All right. Welcome back. Grounding ourselves in breathing can help us feel less stress, more connected with ourselves in the present moment, as well as connected with each other. We've actually just done a short mindful practice. And now we're going to take a moment to get to know even a little bit more about each other. Because a big part of building connection is vulnerability. So I want to invite you all to participate in a moment of vulnerability with me right now. In the chat, share one type of connection you've personally lost during the pandemic and one way you've gained or strengthened connection. So I'll start. For example, my wife and I have strengthened connection by exploring our love languages. And we've also started using a relationship coaching and self-help app. We've also been having regular check-ins with family. So again, I want to invite you to participate in this moment of vulnerability with me and share one type of connection you've personally lost during the pandemic and one way you've gained or strengthened the connections you have during this pandemic. Oh, wow. Thank you, Tiffany. Weekly walk with friends in your neighborhood. That's fantastic. I've noticed lots of people walking more in my neighborhood too. It's good for connection and it's good for exercise. And someone shared that a relative passed during COVID. Many Americans can relate to that. Many students, importantly, relate to that. Going on hikes, yes, awesome way to exercise and build connection with family. Thank you all for sharing. So far, we've actually practiced two culturally responsive approaches to building connection. The first is mindfulness, and the second is prioritizing relationship building before getting into the work. Thank you, Jillian, for sharing, spending more time with your daughter's friends and spouse. It's wonderful. All right, so here's our agenda. We've just done introductions. Next, we'll talk about how we got to this point in our society. We're going to talk about white dominant cultural practices and the archetypes that shape how we live, work, and learn. And then we'll discuss cultural responsiveness as an antidote or paradigm shift. And that'll be followed by a discussion of leadership and the importance of emotional intelligence and the relationship between being culturally responsive and being emotionally intelligent. And then we'll follow that with a quick case study on how we use technology to build connection at Lesson B, both internally and externally with our customer, and offer some tips for you to do the same, and then finally Q&A. I just want to start by saying that this past year has been marked by such tragedy and profound loss of life and profound changes in the way we live and work. Black Lives Matter protests sprung up not only across the country, but across the world, demanding an end to police brutality, and people continued calling out systemic racism and white supremacy in myriad professions. Countless young people took to social media, platforms like Instagram, to call out racism within schools and made the connection to policing with impunity and the trauma inflicted on young people through racist educational practices. Millions of people lost loved ones and lost their livelihoods as a result of a global health pandemic that hit communities of color the hardest. And it's given us an opportunity to examine systemic racism and injustices and to call ourselves, our communities, and our government to action. Bettina Love, professor of education at the University of Georgia, and author of We Want to Do More Than Survive, wrote, "As a Black woman, I am keenly aware of how this virus is disproportionately killing Black people because of environmental racism, medical and housing discrimination, and a racist educational school system that leads to low-wage jobs for Black and Brown Americans, which is why Black people are a large majority of the essential workers in this crisis and those dying on the front lines." In her book, she explains how we can learn from the abolitionist practices and teachers of the past in order to chart a path forward. Whether you are an educator or you simply went through the US school system, you have experienced the ways in which America's history shapes how we educate our youth, what we value and prioritize. And this translates to our organizational and political culture and what we prioritize and value within our workplaces. There are too few places where cultural diversity is truly respected and celebrated instead of tokenized. And reinforcing Love's observation, these images from the National Center for Disaster Preparedness and the Earth Institute of Columbia University show the disproportionate impact COVID has had on communities of color, especially Black people, as evidenced by the chart on the right, service workers, rent-burdened households, as shown in the image on the left. Historian Ibram X. Kendi argues in Stamped from the Beginning, if we have any hope of grappling with the reality of continued racism in the United States, we must first understand how racist ideas were developed, disseminated, and enshrined in American society. And in her book, Caste, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Isabel Wilkerson quotes James Baldwin as saying, "No one was white before he or she came to America." Wilkerson's book recounts the history of the United States and posits that there has, from its inception, been a caste system that gives Blacks the lowest possible status and whites top status. In between, we have all of the groups, Asians, Latinos, Indigenous people, and immigrants of African descent. And this caste system allowed generations of people who believe themselves to be white to live under this assumption of inequality. So why is this important for us today? As we've come together to talk about how to maximize leadership potential and increase productivity. It's important because to lead others optimally, they must want to follow you, which means they must trust you and they must feel that you see them and whatever decisions you make have their best interests at heart. A lot of what I'm going to share with you today can be found in this book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. Strategies to build connection with your students, your coworkers, and at home. To build a relationship grounded in trust, we must first both affirm and validate, she writes. And validation refers to the explicit recognition and acknowledgement of historical institutional racism, negative stereotyping, and generalizations that impact culturally and linguistically diverse students. This past summer, in the protests after Breonna Taylor and George Floyd's murders, anti-racism books were widely shared and read. I'm sure some of you have been on email chains and threads circulating all types of resources. The ongoing work, however, of dismantling white supremacy and systems of inequality is more difficult than showing solidarity and allyship when there's a wave of national outrage. In order to dismantle white supremacy, we must be able to recognize its characteristics. And dismantlingracism.org gives us these 13 characteristics of white supremacy or white dominant culture, which we're going to share with you now in the chat. And these characteristics can be present even in workplaces that are run by people of color. It's very important to recognize that because we've all been conditioned in this way just growing up and being educated in the United States. So let's take a closer look at 5 of these characteristics in more detail. On the left, you see the characteristic, and on the right, a summary of the antidote. Now, obviously, just reading about the antidote isn't enough. We all have to be actively involved in both personal and group self-reflection and be committed to changing workplace and school norms. But for now, I'm going to read through the characteristics on the left. And while I'm doing that, I want you to consider if any of these resonate with you based on your experiences at school, at work, or at home. So please share in the chat anything that resonates with your experience and why. I can personally say that I've definitely experienced defensiveness throughout my career, coming into new organizations, identifying things that could be better, proposing changes when organizations aren't ready to change, for example. I've experienced power hoarding in organizations. Mhm. Perfectionism has been something that I've struggled with personally and professionally. Yeah, decision-making process from Corinne being unclear or assumed to be known. It's quite a challenge. Yes. Thank you for sharing, Catherine. If anything else comes to mind, I know there's a lot here that people probably want to respond to. So please feel free to continue sharing how you've experienced any of these characteristics. Again, at school, at work, at home. What resonates with you in your experience and why? Paternalism working at top higher education institution. Yes. Thank you, Rose. So we've reflected and resonated with a few of the characteristics of white supremacy culture. Now I'd like to expand on one feature in particular, individualism. Now, individualism, it has its pros and cons. In her book, Zaretta, uh, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, again, she writes about the cultural archetypes of collectivism and individualism. And these archetypes reflect fundamentally different ways the brain organizes itself. Our brains are wired for a communal view of the world. In chapter 2, titled What's Culture Got to Do with It, Hammond writes, humans have always sought to be in community with each other because it enhanced our chances of survival. And that's really important, especially in today's context, in this global health pandemic. We shared workloads and resources. And as people moved from rural communities to urban communities, they became less communal and more individualistic. European and Western cultures tend to be more individualistic, celebrating competition, belief that you need to solve problems on your own, and have a tendency to credit individual effort instead of group effort. People are more likely to look out for their self-interests or the interests of only their immediate family versus the good of the community, the organization, the team. So American culture leans towards individualism and competition, which again can have individual economic advantages, especially within a capitalistic system, but it tends to leave a lot of people struggling at the bottom. So take a moment to think about where you're at, whether you're in school or you're a working professional. What are some ways in which your environment might look different with greater emphasis on collectivist values? Or if you're already modeling these values, share some ways in which you currently do so. Just wearing a mask and socially distancing. Thank you, Clementina. It is an example of collectivist value, working with families on how to support their children at home. Thank you, Danielle. Promoting service work. Yes. Elizabeth says sharing credit on the team. It's very important. Thank you, Catherine. Training young people to use data to solve problems in their communities. Wonderful. Thank you all. Please feel free to continue sharing. So not only are culturally responsive practices important to implement within our schools and our workplaces, there are implications for our connections and relationships. There's clear impact on community health. Research shows that individualistic culture can make collective action, such as a coordinated response to a pandemic, more difficult. And this is because people in more individualistic societies tend to pursue their own interests rather than the collective good. Collectivism, on the other hand, which emphasizes group loyalty, conformity, obedience towards one's superiors, makes collective action easier. And the graph on the right shows countries that are more individualistic further to the right. And the vertical axis portrays the death rate per case in each country. So as you can see, there is an overall correlation between individualism and death rate per case. When it comes to the pandemic, collectivist societies have been more successful at managing the outbreak of COVID-19. Looking beyond COVID-19, we can see that white dominant culture in our schools and workplaces is suffocating literally and figuratively. On the right is a quote from a popular Instagram account that chronicles the stories of educators and students who studied and worked at one of the most heralded charter schools in the city. If white dominant culture is suffocating, responding to racially and linguistically diverse learners in a way that affirms identities is like pumping oxygen into the room. Culturally responsive teachers and leaders recognize the value of collectivist culture and implement strategies such as building relationships, validating history and historical context, and creating shared goals. Relationships are not superficial, Hammond stresses, and there's also important emphasis placed on rigor. It's very important to understand that. In other words, being culturally responsive is not just celebrating culture or being affirming without giving very clear and direct feedback against a high bar of excellence. It's actually holding both truths at the same time. We can start with vulnerable relationships, and care. And we must incorporate and validate others' identities in a way that maintains a high level of rigor and thinking in our schools and our classrooms, as well as our workplaces and our home lives. So I've talked a bit about white supremacist or white dominant culture, the importance of understanding and validating history, the history of colonialism in the United States, and the archetypes of individualism and collectivism. Now, before we get into the paradigm shift, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself and why I'm not only drawn to culturally responsive practices as an educator, but I also strive to implement them in my personal life. So this is me standing with my grandmother on the day of my kindergarten graduation. And growing up, my formal education wasn't affirming, it wasn't rigorous enough or validating of my people's history. Uh, and as a queer Black youth in a strongly religious family with both Christian and Muslim relatives, I struggled with social isolation. And I had two parents that both worked two jobs. And I was a good kid, high performing, athletically, academically, the kind of kid that over time people just leave to their own devices, not realizing that they may have interpersonal struggles. So I didn't feel affirmed in my gender because people would always call me a tomboy or say my interests were for boys. I engaged in self harm that at the time I didn't register as self harm, but as a way of connecting that I had seen modeled by adults around me. Now, as an adult, I have a strong sense of self now and recognize that my self worth isn't measured by my academic or athletic performance or any of those kinds of things. But it took a very long time to shake off the vestiges of an individualistic culture that had me constantly striving, but ultimately unhappy. And if I'm being honest, I'm still doing that work on a daily basis. But when I think about my daughter growing up in today's world, I don't want her to be consumed by the same hangups that prevented me from being my authentic self, my best self at various stages of my life. So, in this next section, we're going to discuss leadership characteristics that can help you and the people around you reach their fullest potential. And emotional intelligence is the headline. To be a strong leader requires emotional intelligence. You cannot be emotionally intelligent without being culturally responsive. And I want to say that just one more time. You cannot be emotionally intelligent without being culturally responsive. A key component to become more culturally responsive is emotional self management and emotional intelligence. This term, sometimes shortened to EI or EQ, it's made its way into everyday vocabulary, and there's science to support its effectiveness in building more inclusive and productive and profitable workplaces. The term emotional intelligence first appeared in 1964, but it wasn't until 95 when science journalist Daniel Goleman published a book by the same name, Emotional Intelligence, that the term became widely known. And Goldman claimed that emotional intelligence was the main component of superior leadership performance. So what happened? It caused leaders everywhere to wonder, what is it? Do I have it? How do I get it? Is it actually a thing? So what is emotional intelligence? It's the ability to manage your emotions as well as the emotions of others. Discern between different feelings and label them appropriately. Use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior and adjust emotions to adapt to environments. It is related to, but not the same as empathy, an English word translated from the German psychological term Einfühlung, literally meaning feeling in. Empathy is the ability to feel what another person is feeling, to experience their emotions through your own lens. So, cultural empathy is having an appreciation and consideration for the differences and similarities of another culture in comparison to one's own. Self-awareness, also important in all this, plays a big role in whether or not a person has the ability to imagine themselves in someone else's feelings. And it makes sense that people who practice empathy are better able to understand, relate to, and create the best possible outcomes for those they lead. Studies show that people with high emotional intelligence have greater mental health, job performance, and leadership skills. Goldman also found that EI comprised 67% of superior leader performance abilities, twice as important as technical expertise or IQ. But there's a paradox. Leaders often lose the qualities people initially saw in them. In his new book called The Paradox of Power, social psychologist Dasher Keltner argues that the more power you attain, the harder it is to empathize with the people around you. According to Keltner, accumulating power seems to trigger a tendency to self-absorption. In experiments where people are asked to draw the letter E on their forehead so that others can read it, powerful people are actually more likely to draw it the right way around to themselves and backwards to onlookers, indicating they no longer see the world from other people's perspectives. So the power paradox suggests it is precisely by becoming a leader that leaders lose the qualities people who first looked up to them initially saw in them. So those at the top of the tree may be the very people most blind to the problems of powerlessness, of poverty, and inequality, even if they started out well-meaning and wanting to create real change. Can anyone relate to that? Has anyone experienced that in their lives or noticed it of leaders, world leaders, leaders of big organizations, leaders you've directly reported into maybe? So culturally responsive practices, they center listening without defensiveness and sharing decision-making power. Teachers asking for feedback from their students. Managers and business leaders seeking feedback and listening to their constituents and those that they lead. The reality is we live in a world that prizes empathy, emotional intelligence, collaboration, while simultaneously still influenced by the vestiges of the old Machiavellian rule. And sometimes when confronted with all the demands of leadership, we forget to self-assess, to take a step back, to learn, to grow, to work, to remain open-hearted and open-minded. So I want you all to take a moment to consider these two questions. The buzz around emotional intelligence is that people experience increased leadership ability, increased team performance, improved decision-making, increased personal well-being, reduced staff turnover, decreased occupational stress. There's a lot of benefits. So take a moment and consider these two questions. How can I self-assess, learn, grow, and work to remain open-hearted and open-minded? How can I accurately self-assess and practice the skills that consistently and continuously increase inclusion and empathy? Feedback is incredibly important in being both culturally responsive and emotionally intelligent. Great leaders care about feedback, listen to feedback, and know how to work with feedback. So what's the secret of great feedback? A team of psychologists at Stanford, Yale, Columbia, and elsewhere, they recently set out to explore that question. And they designed an experiment. They had middle school teachers assign an essay writing assignment to their students, after which the students were given different types of teacher feedback. And to their surprise, researchers discovered that there's one particular type of teacher feedback that improved student effort and performance so much that they deemed it magical. Students who received this feedback chose to revise their papers far more often than students who did not. A 40% increase among white students, a 320% boost among Black students. And it improved their performance significantly. So, what is this magical feedback? I'm sure you're wondering. It's just one phrase, and I'm curious to see if anyone is familiar with this. So, take a guess, take a minute to think about it, and then write it in the chat. What is this magical phrase to elicit feedback? I believe in you. Okay, that's good. What do you think? What do you think again? Okay. Fabiola says, asking student. Oh, Catherine, you're good. Carolyn Cooper says, tell me more. All right. Okay, here we go. The magical phrase, the secret of getting great feedback. It's I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them. That's it. It's 19 empowering words that create a sense of belonging and connection. But looking at it, we can see that the phrase contains several distinct signals. First, it says you are a part of this group. Second, it says this group is special. We have higher standards here. And third, it says, I believe you can reach those standards. The key is to understand that this feedback isn't just feedback, it's a signal. It's a vital clue about the relationship. And the reason this approach works so well is it has to do with how our brains are built. Evolution has built us to be very conscious and careful with our efforts because engagement, from a biological standpoint, it's expensive, it takes energy. But when we receive authentic, crystal clear signals of social trust, belonging, high expectations, the floodgates open. Maya Angelou and Carol Buchner are both quoted as saying, they may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what we're talking about. So when giving feedback, it's important to set high expectations, and unconscious biases often lead to differences in the types of feedback and the degree of development across lines of difference. So in addition to those magical words, I want to share a particular type of feedback that is in line with our theme of culturally responsive practice. And it's just what Catherine mentioned. It's asset-based feedback. In the simplest terms, an asset-based approach to feedback, it focuses on strengths. It views diversity in thought and culture and traits as positive assets. People are valued for what they bring to the table rather than being characterized by what they may lack or what they need to work on. So asset-based teaching seeks to unlock a student's potential by focusing on their talents. It's also known as strengths-based teaching. And this approach contrasts with the more common deficit-based style of teaching, which highlights students' inadequacies. Jacqueline Richards, a psychotherapist for children and teens, writes about this in a recent Edutopia article. And she says, while traditional rules and consequences discipline, it's sometimes effective in stopping detrimental behaviors. It may have negative effects on the long-term resilience and connection within the community. As a leader, you have power and influence over others, whether you're a leader in your household or at work or all of the above. There's someone for whom you're their mentor. There is someone for whom you're their role model. I guarantee you. But not all power and influence are created equally, according to Raven and French. There are 6 bases of leadership power: coercive, reward, legitimate, expert, reverent, and informational. And each form of power, when used to influence someone, has a different impact on the relationship and the outcomes. And some are better than others. And there's one in particular that's really important. Some might even say it's the best one. So I want to pose this question to you. We're going to do a poll. Which of the following bases of leadership power do you think has the best impact on relationships and outcomes? And we'll give about 30 seconds for responses to come in. You should see the poll on your screen now and just click the one that you think has the best impact on relationships and outcomes. Mm, okay. And the results are in. So it looks like the majority of people said legitimate. That makes sense. You definitely want power to be legitimate. Coming in second is reverent, and in third is informational. It's quite good. Interesting. All right, so now we will reveal the answer. It's reverent. Reverent power. It results in other people wanting to please you for who you are as an individual. It is the best form of power for getting people to really own what they're doing and to try to produce great outcomes. So if you can learn to implement these best practices that we've been talking about, you can not only build connections, you will maximize your leadership potential and increase productivity and profits in the process. Pandemics throughout history have given an opportunity for something new. The Black Plague in medieval Europe was followed by the Renaissance, the 1918 flu followed by the Roaring '20s. I believe we have a chance to imagine different ways of being in relationship and operating and put them into practice now. So here's what we've discussed so far. We did our introductions. We talked about white dominant culture, the archetypes, the practices. We've talked about culturally responsiveness as a paradigm shift, and we've talked about the importance of leading with emotional intelligence. So now I just want to spend a few minutes talking with you about how we apply these things to technology, to building connection through a quick case study of Lesson B. Now, when I started Lesson B, I knew that I wanted to create a product that was culturally responsive and an adult culture that was culturally responsive. At Lesson B, we prioritize health and connection. When students learn independently through our modules, they are in conversation with others. And we use play and familiar scenarios for students. We also ensure that there's diversity and cultural references all built into the platform so that teachers could flip their lessons and be responsive to students' needs. But what I really want to share with you is the ways in which we've infused culturally responsive practices into the organization, not just in the product, but how we operate. So one thing that we've done is we intentionally created our culture and values together. We've actually quite recently created a shared vision of excellence. We didn't start out with that. We took time, we learned from each other, we learned from our mistakes, we saw things that were working and not working for each other, and we recognized that individuals had different perspectives around what excellence meant. And so in a way, we crowdsourced this new vision of excellence. We make culture front and center in everything that we do, from our hiring decisions to our product decisions. And we do that very explicitly. We don't do it in a way that's cagey, and we don't do it in a way that doesn't have clear goals. We have frequent check-ins with each other. Through the pandemic, weekly Zoom meetings, weekly lunch meetings. We're using Slack for daily, regular communication. We have new hires tell their story as soon as they join the organization. What was the connection between our mission and the impact that you want to see in the world? And we don't just do that as, a protocol. We do that because it's important. We're building a technology for kids and teens, so we invite kids and teens to be a part of our course and lesson development process. We integrate their perspectives. We listen and take action on their feedback. And we conduct research to ensure our content is inclusive and medically accurate. So how can you begin to apply culturally responsive practices in your work and life? So as we did, one thing you might want to do is just reflect on your values. Do they reflect the right actions and mindsets? And look, even if you've done it and you have a mission statement and you have cultures and values, it's truly ongoing work. Don't be afraid to revisit them and make sure that they're still aligned with where you see your organization today. Create goals that are good for the group and communicate them clearly. Line of sight with the business at all levels is important. Get to know the people in your environment and really listen. Interrogate individualist versus collectivist values in your own life and in your work. And affirm other people's culture and validate history. Give feedback that communicates high expectations and confidence, and establish resources and steps for people to get to that next level. Don't just leave people to their own devices. Continue to learn and practice empathy rather than just assume you have it. I want to thank you all for joining me today. That is the conclusion of this presentation. I really enjoyed the time that we've spent together, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, before I start asking you questions and everything, Reva, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. I feel like, I mean, we just went through so much. We were able to clear our minds a little bit, make sure that we really got to focus with you. Thank you to everyone in who is attending and gave us these great responses and, love sharing your stories with us. We truly appreciate it. So we have, about 9 minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions for Reva, please feel free to take some time and put them in the Q&A pane, which is located below. We'd love to hear your questions. So the first question we have, Reva, we kind of spoke during the presentation about work culture. And, sometimes people are a little averse to change. And so this person has a question on how do we integrate culturally responsive practices in the workplace to change that workplace culture if people are just they don't want to change, they don't want to do anything differently than they've done, the past few years or decades.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's like anything, you have to first establish where you're at in order to establish where you want to go. So at the very minimum, see if you can get people to engage in that process. So we talked about, for example, white dominant culture, and we talked about individualistic versus collectivist values. Is there someone in your organization who would be willing to look across the organization and see where you're at today to establish a vision for the future? And I think a part of that and what's important in that process from a business perspective is understanding the impact that those different values are having in your workplace, right? Because you have to be able to tie it to business outcomes and to performance. So if you can look at the values and you can get feedback on how these things are operating in the workplace and the pros and cons of them, then that's probably establishing a good foundation for positive change.
Yes, getting that buy-in is always just so important if you want to try to create any type of change. So thank you so much for that. The next question we have, so This attendee is talking about specifically that magical feedback slide that we were in that study you were talking about. She was
Yeah.
wondering if you could share any more information about that study and, just kind of the background of it because she found it extremely fascinating and wanted to learn a little bit more.
Yes, I could. And I would invite you to email me. Could I just drop my email address in the chat?
Yeah, please feel free to do that. And then just to let everyone know, I mean, we'll be sending out a follow up email to all the registrants, and you'll get this incredible recording of our webinar today. And we'll also be putting Reva's contact information there. But Reva, feel free to put it in the chat as well. That way they can just email you immediately to get more information.
Yeah, I just dropped that in there.
Okay, perfect. So the next question that I got is talking about emotional intelligence. You had
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, you can't be culturally responsive without being emotionally intelligent.
Hmm.
So how do we become better at becoming, emotionally intelligent, being more aware of our surroundings and being more socially aware? How do we do that? What steps can we take?
Yeah, and also I see a comment from Jillian in the chat that I might want to respond to. So it was, you can't be emotionally intelligent without being culturally responsive. And the point there really is just going deeper with people. And so sometimes, we engage on a very superficial level of understanding where people are at. It's about going deeper with those conversations and really understanding and getting to know people. A big part of it is listening with intent, right? So sometimes we think we get it. We think we see, we know that we have kids who have certain, learning needs, for example, and come from certain backgrounds, and maybe they're getting reduced lunch. Maybe I know this about their home life, but do you really know the student? So that's the first step, is to get to know people on a deeper level and to build and establish trust. And then things flow from there. So to be culturally responsive and to be emotionally intelligent, is it all comes down to actually establishing a foundation of trust that requires you to listen more, to care about where people are coming from, and to take actions that demonstrate your investment in them, not just professionally but personally.
That's
And then
fantastic. Thank you so
Jillian,
much. Mhm.
yes, and Jillian posted something, further suggestions for how to hold high expectations but not venture into perfectionist expectations. The main response that I want to give you, Jillian, is that you need to just establish goals in concert. And that's really the key. So you have to establish goals. You have to establish standards in alignment with, if you're talking about your students, for example, with where they're at. And you have to also provide resources, and you have to also recognize that struggle is a part of it. You know what I mean? So it shouldn't be too hard and it shouldn't be too easy, but there has to be effort extended for progress to be made, for that intellectual capacity to be triggered and to grow. But it has to be a continuing relationship and a joint effort.
Great. So the next question we have, so we have an attendee whose organization recently surveyed all their employees and found out that many people did not feel included in their workplace culture. And the leaders recognize that this is a problem, but doesn't understand to know like where it's coming from or how to solve it. How do we counteract that these tendencies for people with power just lose their empathy so quickly?
How do you counteract the fact that leaders lose their empathy quickly?
Yeah, that tendency just to kind of lose empathy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really incumbent upon the leader to recognize that and to be willing to do the work. But if you're talking about a leader of a business or an organization, it always comes down to what data do you have? So can you demonstrate that this is happening and that it's having an impact on the organization so that they can then be invested in doing the work that's necessary? And honestly, I mean, they may not have seen this study that we just discussed. So if you can show this to them and say, hey, this is actually something that's quite common. It's not just you. I recognize that you're a good person and you're doing good things, but this is something that happens, right? So as a result of that, you have to make these additional efforts to ensure that you are being self-aware, that you are being reflective. That's what it comes down to.
Perfect. And I mean, going back to what we were talking about a little earlier about getting people to recognize where they are, where they're coming from, really truly listening to those people to better understand their needs. How do you think, um, sorry, how do you suggest doing that type of work with our bosses or any supervisors or managers?
I mean, it's going to look different depending on the context, but when in education in restorative justice, I mean, it's all about reflective learning, essentially. It's all about creating a safe and empowering environment where you can actually have conversations and over time build trust and build deeper connections with the students. In a work environment, it's really going to depend on who you're trying to engage in that work. Yeah, so it's a longer question, but if anyone is looking for some specific examples, again, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to have a 15-minute chat with you about your particular challenges.
Well, I want to be mindful about time and we just have one more minute.
Mm.
But I just first off want to tell you, Reva, thank you so, so much for taking the time to really give us a better understanding about cultural responsive practices and also
Mhm.
how do we incorporate those practices in our workplaces in our homes with our families. So thank you so much, Reva. This has been so informative, and I know, I mean, we've gotten so many comments in the chat just really thanking you for such a powerful and impactful presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And hopefully everyone's going to get the resource. We're sharing a resource that will have links to lots of the sources for the things that I've discussed.
Mhm.
Please, it really does take a lot of work and it's more than we could cover today, but avail yourselves of those resources and books and feel free
Perfect.
to reach out to me.
Definitely. So, like Riva says, we will be sending out a follow up email after this. It will have the recording to this webinar, it'll have Riva's contact information, and it'll also have her resource handouts. Everyone, I just want to let you know to stay tuned to our emails and social media for details on future events, including our next event, which is Meet the Funders, Demystifying the Grant Process, which will be on February 9th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you at future TC alumni events. Until then, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone. Thank you.